This computer. There we
Good
go.
night.
Good night, mister. You have a good sleep, okay?
Okay.
And share screen. There we go. All right. Now this shouldn't take very long. It's where are we from the beginning? It's not too complicated. However, there is one thing, and I'm not sure why, but there's a general theme that most Adventists get wrong in this chapter. All right. So we are going to be talking about the 144,000. Have you ever heard of them before? 144,000. It's this mysterious group that's mentioned in Revelation. Yes, good. Let me push the chat here on the corner so I can see what you're writing. Yeah, so it's kind of this mystery group. We know it's part of God's people, but there's multiple ideas of what it can be. So I'll give you a few generalized things before we actually read it. So some people think that it's completely literal, which means that it's going to be 144,000 literal people at the end of the world who are given this special job to preach or to do something. They're going to be literally Jews. So 144,000 literal Jews who I guess become Christians and then preach this message. And they live right at the end of Earth's history. So that's the super literal view. There's another view that's kind of half literal, half figurative, which is they're not literally Jews. They could be anybody, but there is 144,000 of them. That's still literal. And these guys are kind of like the cream of the crop, the best of the best. So like the super Adventists, right? Who follow all the rules perfectly. And they're kind of like the example to the world, right? This light to the world, which gives you then layers of Adventism, and it kind of gets, and that's making it just Adventist, right? There's another group that says that it's all symbolic. So it just simply means this is the group of people who are going to go through the end times, right? So like maybe us, if Jesus comes soon, we're part of the 144,000. So there is a lot of ideas on this. One of the reasons why it has a lot of prestige is because during Ellen White's day, she's a prophet, she knows stuff. People would ask her, who are the 144,000? And she would never give a direct answer. In fact, at one point she says, we don't need to know. It's not connected to your salvation, kind of a thing. Like there's more important things to know than that, which automatically makes people go like, ooh, then it must be special, right? Kind of a thing. So they got the exact opposite message out of it. But one of the general themes that people do say, and you find this across the board, is that the 144,000 are the group of people that go through the Great Tribulation, all right? So these are the group, whether it's symbolic or literal, but it's the group of people that will go through the great last calamities, right? Like the plagues and all of that stuff. And what's funny about that is the one thing that most people agree on is the one thing that's completely wrong. And you're going to see it as we read it. There's no way around it. All right. It is very clearly not the way they see it. And then I'm going to flip my answer and say, well, but it can be, but we'll get to that. All right. So let's start reading from the beginning. It starts off really easy. Sam, you want to read this 1 to 3?
After these things, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, on the sea, or on any tree. Then I saw another angel ascending from the east, having a seal of the living God. And he cried with a loud voice to the 4 angels to whom it was granted to harm the earth and the sea, saying, do not harm the earth, the sea, or the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads.
Okay, so we're getting a bunch of imagery here, right? Some symbolism here. So we have 4 angels holding back these 4 winds, right? The 4 winds, northeast, southwest kind of a thing. So the winds usually represent calamities, right? So destruction and big events and all, like the end of the world kind of a thing. So these four angels are holding back the end of the world. They're like, wait, not yet, kind of, like a roadie or something, or security kind of a thing. And then this angel appears who has this seal, right? Like this stamp, which is with the seal of the living God. And he tells the four angels, keep holding it back until I finished my job, right? Until I finished sealing everyone on their foreheads. And it's important. The seal of God only goes on the forehead. The mark of the beast is different. The mark of the beast can go on your forehead or on your hand. And we'll get to that as to why that in a little bit, maybe. So yes, we're talking about, we're getting very close to the end of the world, right? That's what those four winds represent. And we're on the sixth seal as well, right? We're in between the sixth and seventh seal. So we're right at the end of the world. So it makes sense that people would assume that these that are going to be sealed then are those that will go through the Great Tribulation. Except there's a caveat, and we'll get to that, all right? Read this one here, and then I'll read the next one because it's just a bunch of names.
And I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000 of all the tribes of all the children of Israel were sealed.
Okay, so here we get this number, right? And this is the first time the number appears, 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel were sealed, all right? So here's the first thing that can determine whether you're doing good studying or not. If you clearly see that some things are symbolic, then all of it should be symbolic, right? Like we don't really have the authority to say, well, this is symbolic, this is literal, this thing. Then it goes back to symbolic, back to literal. Because if you do it that way, then you can make up whatever you want. So either the chapter is symbolic or it's literal. And so you have to make that choice. If it's literal, then all of it has to be literal, right? The number has to be literal, and the people being sealed have to be literal, which means that the only people that have the seal of God, these 144,000, have to be Jews, which means that none of us can be sealed because we're not Jews, right? We don't have the bloodline of Abraham, right? We're Gentiles in that sense. And so the idea, in the same sentence, and this is why I say it's bad studying. In one sentence, they go like this: 144,000 literal of all the tribes of the children of Israel, symbolic. Like, how do you jump within the same sentence between literal and symbolic, right? Like, that's just bad Bible studying, right? Like, you're not following any sort of rules. You're just making up whatever you want based on what you want it to say, kind of a thing. So really, based on this verse, you either have to go completely one way or completely the other way. So it's either literal or it's symbolic. Except that in verse 1, we already got a bunch of symbolism, right? The winds. We know that it's not literal winds. We know that, one day angels aren't going to fly away and all this, suddenly a wind is going to sweep the world and we're all going to be blown away, kind of a thing. We know the winds symbolize something else, right? Strife, calamities, and so on. And remember, in verse 3, it says, do not harm the earth, the sea, or the trees till we have sealed the servants. The earth, the sea, and the trees symbolize people, not actual, the angel doesn't care about trees, literal trees. As we go through Revelation, you'll see that trees usually represent God's people. The sea usually represents where there's a lot of people, so big cities and stuff like that. And the earth or the desert represents more remote areas, right? So kind of less populated areas. But the key here is that it's talking about people, right? Like, don't start killing people until they've made their choice. That's what this means, right? So all of these verses 1 to 3 is being symbolic. Why would verse 4 suddenly become literal? Just out of the blue, right? And not just become literal, but only become literal halfway and then go back to being symbolic. Sam, go ahead.
Sorry, are you disputing, not disputing, but are you suggesting that the number is symbolic, or the children of Israel labeling is symbolic, or both?
Both.
Okay.
Because again, you have to choose. So you either, if the number is literal, then everything else has to be literal, right? So the 12 tribes, which I'll read now, because not only does it have to be only Jews who are sealed, but then it has to be 12,000 of each tribe, right? So I won't actually read this here, but basically it just repeats. Of the tribe of Judah, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Reuben, 12,000, Gad, 12,000, Asher, Naphtali, Manasseh, Simeon, and so on, right? 12 tribes. So out of the 144,000 literal number, that means that there has to be 12,000 literal descendants of Judah that will be sealed, 12,000 literal Reubenites sealed, and so on. And here's the problem with this. And this is why they like to say, well, this is literal and this is symbolic. None of these tribes exist anymore. There is no blood Judah anymore. They've all been intermixed. In fact, 10 out of the 12 tribes are completely lost. We have no idea what happened to them. They just disappeared, kind of a thing. So none of these tribes really exist. Now you can argue, well, I have some blood that's from Judah. Yeah, but odds are, if you're Israelite, then you probably have some Manasseh, some Simeon, some, because they started intermixing, right? So you can't find 12,000 people of Judah, 12,000 of Gad, 12,000 of Asher, and so on. And you realize, again, this is very precise numbers again, right? So if the 144,000 is a literal number, then it just stands to be that the 12,000 would also be literal, right? Because the way you're getting 144,000 is by having 12,000 12 times, right? It's 12,000 times 12 is 144,000. So you see how it makes it very complicated for it to be a literal number. A lot of things have to happen for this 144,000 to be literal, which is why personally, and I'll explain why, because I actually have biblical stuff to support this, why I say it's symbolic, all right? But we'll get to that. So there's 144,000 that are sealed, all from the tribes of Israel, and each tribe is equally divided by 12,000, all right? Let me go back here for a second. So from verse 1 to 3, it doesn't tell us anything about the people that are being sealed, right? It just says that people are going to be sealed, all right? In verse 4, it gives us some information. It tells us how many are going to be sealed, and it tells us who's going to be sealed, which are the children of Israel, right? But that's all we learn. We don't know what they're wearing. We don't know what they're holding. We don't know what they look like, and so on. We just know that a number and tribes of Israel. Then we're giving just more detail about Israel. It's 12,000 12 times, right? The 12 tribes of Israel. That is all we're given, okay? And that's important because in chapter, I think it says Revelation 6, but I think it should say 7, right? In Revelation 7, there's actually two stories there. So we just read the first story. The first story is about these four angels, right, holding back the winds. And then another angel shows up with a stamp, says, listen, I'm going to seal 144,000 people, all from the children of Israel. First story. In verse 9, we get a second story, a second group of people. So you want to read this for me, Sam, verses 9 and 10?
After these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude which no one could number, of all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes, with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, saying, Salvation belongs to our God, who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb.
All right. Shondis, I believe the two were the Levites and Judah. They're the ones that stayed in Judah, while Israel, you remember how Israel was separated, right? So Judah became its country, and then Israel became the country of the north. Israel is the one that got destroyed by like the Assyrians and stuff like that. They never came back, so they got dispersed. So Judah and Levi, I believe, are the two that remained, or maybe it's Benjamin. I can't remember, but I think it's Judah and the Levites. All right. So here we have a second group of people, right? In this one, we get details. All right. So the first thing that we learn is that it's a great multitude that no one can number. So it's a massive number, right? Which is a good thing because this is talking about who's going to be saved, right? So the bigger the number, the better. Better odds for us, right? So a great multitude that no one can number. And this is of all tribes, nations, peoples, tongues. So it doesn't matter if you're Jew. This is talking about everyone in the world, everyone that's going to be saved, all right, is who we're talking about here. And they stand before the throne and before the Lamb. So that's what God's people are going to do. We're going to stand before God and worship him and Jesus and so on. But then it gives us some more details. It says that they're clothed with white robes. We knew this, right? When you go to heaven, we're all going to get a white robe, right? But realize that it's only in verse 9 that we're getting these details. We have no idea what that first group is wearing, right? It never says. It doesn't say that they're wearing white robes, doesn't say any of those things. In fact, we only get the white robes when we get to heaven, right? So it stands to believe that they weren't wearing white robes, the first group. These are people that are still on the earth. So they're wearing normal clothes, right? Clothes like us. But this group without number, they're the ones wearing a white robe. That is vital, okay? And they also have palm branches in their hands. So the two things that we know, what they're wearing and what they're holding, white robes and palms, okay? And crying out with a loud voice saying, salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. Like always, we get a bit of music in here. Revelation's always full of music. So before we read on, realize that we have two groups now, right? One group that we know very little about. All we know is that there are 144,000 and that they're sealed by God and that they're Israelites, right? Jews, 12 tribes of Israel. The second group we know a lot. We know they're wearing white robes. We know they have palm branches. We know that they're from every tribe. We know that they're a great multitude that no one can number, and that they're standing before God. All right? Does that make sense? Very clear, very simple. Let me read the next verse here, verse 11. All the angels stood around the throne and the elders and the four living creatures and fell on their faces before the throne and worshiped God, saying, Amen, blessing and glory and wisdom, thanksgiving and honor and power and might be to our God forever and ever. Amen. So this is classic Revelation again. A little group starts singing and then everyone else starts singing in, right? So first it's that great multitude, they're singing to God. And then suddenly everybody's singing, all the angels and everything else, all the elders and stuff are singing. All right. Okay, this is where it gets important. Sam, read just verse 13 first.
Then one of the elders answered, saying to me, who are these arrayed in white robes, and where did they come from?
Okay, so this makes a very simple question, right? One of the elders, one of the ones that are standing around John, they ask about one of the two groups, right? Who are these arrayed in white robes? Well, which ones do we know that are arrayed in white robes?
The great multitude.
The great multitude, right? So this is very clearly talking about the great multitude and not the 144,000, right? We have no idea what they wear. It's never mentioned. But the great multitude specifically mentions this. These are the ones dressed in white, but it's a great multitude. So the elder is asking John, who are these guys? They were dressed in white. And let me read verse 14. And I, John, said to him, sir, you know, like, why are you asking me? I don't know. I'm a visitor here, right? You know who these guys are. So tell me. And so he said to me, these are the ones who come out of the great tribulation and washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. This is what everyone screws up. And I don't know why. Because if you ask any Adventist, who are the 144,000? They will say, they are the ones who come out of the great tribulation. But is that what verse 14 is saying? No. this is talking about the great multitude. The great multitude without number are the ones who go through the great tribulation. So now we have an issue. All right, now we have a problem, because when we read the beginning, we know that we're at the end of chapter 6, or at the end of the 6th seal, right? We're very close to the end of the world. The angel shows up, he talks to the other angel saying, listen, don't bring the winds until I've sealed everyone. And so the 144,000 are very clearly those at the end of the world, right? That's just very clear. They're the ones that are going to live right before the winds come in, right? The last people to make a decision. So all the people that say yes to the seal of God, they're the ones that are part of the 144,000, right? The ones at the end. But here it's saying that this great multitude is the one that goes through the great tribulation. So how do we explain this? There's two ways of doing it. The first one is, even though it appears as if we're talking about two groups here, we're actually not. We're talking about one group. The 144,000 are the great multitude. Does that make sense? Maybe.
Like, if by that you mean they're both saved, but they're like that they have that in common.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like the biggest difference is the first group, they very clearly give us a number. And the second one says that you can't do that. There is no number. Like, there's just a lot of them. Here's the thing. Let me go back to verse 3. So you remember that original angel, the one that has the seal of God? Look at what he actually says here. So verse 3, saying, do not harm the earth, the sea, or the trees, till I have sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads. We take it for granted that when he says this, that he's beginning the work, right? So we assume that when he says this to the four angels, that he's going to begin and end the work, right? Give me time to seal the people of God. But we're taking that for granted, because in Ezekiel, and I should have put the verses up here and I didn't, but if you look it up in Ezekiel, actually, let me do it quickly. Let me just do a search for it. In Ezekiel, it makes it very clear that back in the Old Testament, there was an angel with a seal who was sealing God's people. All right, which means that the work of sealing God's people doesn't begin at this time period. What the angel is saying is, listen, give me time for me to finish my work, right? I need to seal those that are still left to be sealed. All right. So let me look it up here. Hopefully this is quick. Let me see. New King James and search. I know it's in Ezekiel, so that'll make it easier. Jeremiah, Ezekiel. I'm not seeing it here. Try Inkhorn, I think. Just give me a sec. If I can't find it, I'll bring it.
But the next verse, verse 4 says, and I heard the number of those who were sealed.
Mm-hmm.
Which makes it sound like 144,000 have already been sealed.
At the end of the work, though, right? So once he's finished doing his work, there was 144,000 that were sealed. All right. I don't think I'm going to be able to find it here. I'm gonna have to bring it. I'll show it next week, because this is going to. I'm not going to have enough time to find it. But in the Old Testament, it's very, very clear that it actually tells us the story An angel appears with the inkhorn, with the stamp, right? And God says, go out and seal God's people on their foreheads and so on. It's almost word for word kind of a thing from what we're reading here. So the only thing they have to understand is the sealing of God's people does not start here. What we're talking about is the finishing of the work, right? It's the ending of the sealing, because people have been sealed by God since the beginning, since Adam and Eve, basically, is what the Bible is suggesting. At the end of the world, everyone in this world, every human being is going to be sealed. You're either sealed by God or you're sealed by the devil, which means this isn't simply an end times thing. This is since the world began. So what the angel is actually saying is, listen, I need to finish my work. So just hold back the winds a little bit longer so I can finish sealing, right? And then at the end of it, when he's done finished sealing, he says that there's 144,000. So there's only two options here. It's either literal or symbolic. If it's literal, it's an awfully small number, right? Because throughout all of history, we're hoping that there's more than 144,000 people that are going to be sealed by God and saved. In fact, we know there is, because we're told in verse 9, right, that those that are going to make it to heaven is a great multitude that we can't number. It's a huge number of people that are going to be saved, which means that this number has to be symbolic then. In fact, both aspects have to be symbolic. Let me start with the second one, because that'll be easier to understand first. So the 144,000 are of all the tribes of the children of Israel. If it was literal, then it would have to be the bloodline of Abraham, right? Those 12 tribes of Israelites that were saved. If it's symbolic, then suddenly we're talking the New Testament version of what it means to be an Israelite. Paul talks about that. He says, listen, there's literal Jews. Those are the bloodline. Those are the descendants of Abraham. But then there's spiritual Jews. And he says that the church, the Christian church, is made up of spiritual Israelites, which is anyone that accepts the salvation of Christ becomes a child of God, becomes part of God's family. And that's really what Israel is, right? Israel is God's children. So symbolically, this can simply mean that, everyone that's going to go to heaven has to be an Israelite, a spiritual Israelite, or in other words, a child of God, right? No one is going to make it to heaven that isn't a child of God. All of us have to be part of God's family to be saved. Does that make sense? All right, so spiritual, that side, very simple to understand. 144,000 gets a little bit more complicated. Except the Bible kind of tells us, it gives us a hint as to why it would be symbolic. It's 12,000 12 times, right? That's how you get the equation or the answer of 144,000. When we get to the end of Revelation, and this is why I have to kind of jump ahead, but when we get to the end of Revelation, we're going to be introduced to the New Jerusalem. Have you heard that before, the New Jerusalem? It's that big square cube that's going to come down from heaven. When we read that, it actually says that the New Jerusalem is the bride of Christ. Do you understand what that means? What does it mean to be the bride of Christ? Any ideas? No. Okay, the Bible tells us. The Bible makes it very clear that we are the bride of Christ, the church. Everyone that accepts Christ, we basically marry Christ. It's like a symbolic thing. And he says the New Jerusalem comes down as the bride of Christ, which tells us that the New Jerusalem is also symbolic. The New Jerusalem symbolizes God's people or the church. Everyone that becomes part of God's family is the New Jerusalem, all right? And as you read the characteristics of the New Jerusalem, very quickly you learn that those are the characteristics that we need to have. So we need to be pure like gold, right? The Bible says that as Christians, we need to be refined in the refined in the fire like pure gold. All right. It says that there's 12 entrances into the New Jerusalem. Each entrance is one of the 12 tribes. So to enter into the New Jerusalem, you have to be one of those 12 tribes, right? So you have to be a child of God or a child of Abraham to enter into the New Jerusalem. Do you see the symbolism there? So to be part of the building, you have to be one of those 12 tribes. If you go into the Old Testament and actually look, there's a whole chapter where Jacob, I believe, Jacob, who had the 12 children, gives a prophecy to each one. When you actually read those, what you actually get is like 12 different types of people or 12 different types of characters. Each one of us, if you read those 12, you'll be like, oh man, I'm a lot like Judah, or I'm a lot like Issachar, I'm a lot like Asher. Like you'll connect to one of those 12, your personality. So really what the 12 tribes are the 12 personalities that exist in the world, right? So some that are more headstrong, others that are more leaders, others that are more followers, and whatever. There's 12 variations. So each of us will fall into one of those 12, which means that, Sam, you might be Judah, Shandis, you might be Manasseh, or whatever it is. Doesn't really make a difference because there's a door for each one of us. So what that really means is it doesn't matter what your personality is. There's a door for you, right? There's an entrance for you. Don't think that, well, because I think this way, I can't be part of God's family. No, there's a door for you. There's a door for every type of personality that exists. All right. So again, there's 12 doors. There's a part in Revelation at the end where he measures the New Jerusalem. All right. And it turns out that it's a perfect cube, right? So there's a length, a width, and a height. If you were to draw a cube, so have you ever done that just with a pencil and draw like the lines and made like a see-through cube? You need to draw 12 lines to do it. So you got to put 4 lengths, 4 heights. Let me draw it here. I think I could do annotations. Let me see. How do I do it? Annotations. All right, let me draw it here. So you want to draw. Let me make some space. Who cares? You have to draw 4 lengths, right? Let me see if I can do this. 4 lengths. You got to draw 4 heights. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 4 widths. 1, 2, 3. That didn't work out too well, but you can see it, right? The cube. So there's 12 lines to make the cube. When John measures each length, which is equal to the length, the height, and the width, each one is exactly 12,000. So there's 12 lines. Each line is 12,000. What does that equal? 144,000. So the New Jerusalem, the measurement or the number, the symbolic number of the New Jerusalem is 144,000, which has 12 entrances, which are the 12 tribes of Israel, 12,000 per entrance. All right. So this number is symbolic. This number of 144,000. Let me stop annotating here. I don't know how I do that here. There you go. So when the angel finishes sealing everyone on earth, he basically says, everyone that I've sealed is symbolically the New Jerusalem. and the number of the New Jerusalem is 144,000. So instead of saying, how many people did you seal? Well, it was a great multitude without number. I can't tell you. He says, well, no, it's the symbolic number of 144,000. The number of the New Jerusalem, the number of everyone who's going to live in the New Jerusalem. And they're going to be equally divided between every personality. You know, there's going to be people from Judah, from Gad, from Reuben, from Asher, Manasseh, blah, 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 right? Or in other words, a great multitude of all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues, all types of people, right? The New Jerusalem, the population of the New Jerusalem is going to be people from everywhere, of all personalities. And it's a huge number, which we symbolically say is 144,000. Does that make sense? When we actually get to that chapter, we'll read it and I'll do the diagram again, and you'll be able to see it very clearly. But you can see why, when you take it symbolically, the 144,000 then is this great multitude. It's the same group. The only difference being the 144,000 are the ones that are sealed while they're still on earth. And here in verse 9, we're seeing the same group, but in heaven already, with those white robes, with the palm branches singing to God. So it's not that it's two different groups, it's two different time periods. Those on the earth and those that are already there in heaven. Sam, you have a question?
I was just going to ask where you got the text from with like the cube, but you're saying that it's going to happen later.
It's in Revelation. Yeah, I believe it's Revelation 21. You know what? Let me just jump there quick. I'll just double check. But you can read it. It's very, very clear. It says 12,000. And actually, and then he measures the wall. And so for the 12,000, he uses, let me double check here. I don't want to get this wrong. I think it's Revelation 21. I saw a new heaven and a new earth. And then, yeah, the holy Jerusalem comes down, adorned as a bride for her husband, which is Christ, right? So it's God's people marrying Jesus. Revelation 21, so let me read verses 12 and 13 here first. Also, she had a great and high wall with 12 gates and 12 angels at the gates, and names written on them, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. So the New Jerusalem has 12 gates, each gate having one of the 12 names of the New Jerusalem, right? Very similar to what we just read. Gad, Manasseh, blah, 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 blah. Verse 16. The city is laid out as a square. Its length is as great as its breadth. And he measured the city with a reed, 12,000 furlongs. Its length, breadth, and height are equal. So it specifically tells you, the first it says, well, the breadth is the same as its length, or the width is the same as the length, right? 12,000. But then it specifically goes back and says, but this is a perfect cube. So the height, the length, and the breadth are the same. So it's actually giving you that idea of, if you take all of those lines and add them up, you get the 144,000, all right? What's interesting then is that he measures the wall in verse 17. But instead of using furlongs, which is what he used in 16, whatever that is, he then uses cubits, all right? So in verse 17, it says this, then he measured its wall. And how big is the wall? 144 cubits, according to the measure of a man, that is, of an angel. So again, that number of 144, not 1,000 this time, but you can see how it's similar, right? Instead of it being 12 times 12,000, now it's just 12 times 12. So the city is 144,000 and the wall is 144. That number is there to repeat itself so that you can connect it back to Revelation 7. Does that make sense? Do you see how the number is very clearly there? You just have to do a bit of math to get it. And when we get to chapter 21, every aspect of the city is talking about us. So again, the measurement of the city is talking about the people of God, right? 144,000 then represents God's people. Does that make sense? All right. For me, this makes a lot more sense because it's explained in Revelation. The number appears there in Revelation. It connects the two stories together, and it doesn't have that problem of having the literal Jews, right? Because if you say it's literal, then the Jews have to be literal, and now you've opened up a can of worms because they don't exist, right? How do you find 12,000 Reubenites? They're spread all over, their blood is so mixed that you can't find pure Jews anymore. All right, but now we have a different issue, because it says that this great multitude are the ones that pass through. Let me see here. Yeah, verse 14. So this great multitude without number, those that are wearing the white robes, they're the ones that come out of the great tribulation. Usually when we talk about the great tribulation, we're talking about the end of the world. But it's obvious that not everyone is gonna, come back to life and go through this great tribulation. So how is it that the great multitude has gone through this great tribulation? There's another way of explaining the great tribulation. I'll use Jesus as an example. What killed Jesus? What do you think? What killed Jesus? Was it the nails in the hands? Was it the whip? Was it the thorns in his head? What exactly?
Being disconnected from God.
Yeah,
And the
it's the
weight of sin.
disconnect, and it's the weight of sin, right? It's all of that. Like, it actually, I know there's been some doctors that, remember when he gets speared and blood and water come out? I can't remember who said it, but it's connected to like a massive heart attack. Like, it's so much stress that his body literally just died from stress. It died from just anguish, from pain. It wasn't the nails, it wasn't the whippings, it wasn't those things. Those were physical, right? That's what Jesus went through physically. But the fact is, what Jesus went through spiritually was much worse. Like you said, right? Just that disconnection from God was much worse than being whipped. The end of the world is going to be horrible, right? We know that people are going to be arrested, people are going to be killed, people are going to be hunted down, we're going to be running on the hills, we're going to be starving and thirsty, and all of those things that we read about, right? But that's not really what the Great Tribulation is. The spiritual part is what the Great Tribulation is. What all of us experience, that battle that's in every one of us, that spiritual battle, the fact that we want to be with God, but everything inside of us wants to sin, right? Our bodies, our minds, our thoughts, all of that is evil. All of that is trying to get us to sin. And we have to wrestle with that, with our spiritual natures, and it's that spiritual warfare that's happening inside of us. That's the Great Tribulation. And that's something that all of us have experienced, from Adam and Eve until the last person that's going to live on this earth. All of us will go through that Great Tribulation. That's really what this is talking about. That's where, let me read the whole verse of verse 14. So these are the ones that come out of the Great Tribulation, comma, not period, and washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. So what's the Great Tribulation? It's that battle to get our robes washed, to accept the blood of the Lamb. That idea of being washed, washing the robes and being white in the blood of the Lamb, that's connected to the Great Tribulation. It's not a separate sentence. It goes together, which means that Great Tribulation isn't a time period. It's life, right? It's that struggle that you go through, that I go through, that everyone goes through. That's harder than anything that's going to happen at the end of the world. That's the difficult part, it's giving our hearts to God, right? It's staying pure, it's giving our lives and all that stuff. That's really what the Great Tribulation is. Verse 15, therefore, they are before the throne of God and serve him day and night in his temple. And he who sits on the throne will dwell among them. Again, a lot of people say it's the 144,000 that follow Jesus around, except here it's making it very clear that it's everyone, right? Everyone that's going to be saved, that great multitude that will stand before the throne of God and serve him day and night. It doesn't make a distinction between the 144,000 and this great multitude. Both go through the great tribulation. Both stand before God and worship him and sing and do all these things, which gives a very strong sense that it's actually the same group. The only difference is one is giving us a symbolic number, which connects us to the New Jerusalem, and the other one is more literal. It's just this huge amount of people. I think, when it says, let me go back here for a second. Verse 9. After these things, I looked and behold, a great multitude which no one could number. Is that real? What do you think? Does God not know how many people are going to be saved?
Yeah, no, of course God knows.
Yeah. So when it says no one can number, that's more of an excuse. John probably asked, and they're like, "Oh, it's just a great number. Don't ask that one." Because imagine if John did give us a number. Imagine if John actually said, this is exactly how many people are going to be saved. We would freak out, right? It would screw us either way. Either the number would be massively large and we'd be like, oh man, then I got a good, there's a really good chance I'll go to heaven. I don't even have to try too hard, right? Let me do the bare minimum. The number's big enough, I'll make it in. Or if the number seems small, we'll be like, there's no even point in trying. How many good people have lived before me? They've probably already filled it up. It's probably already full. So on purpose, God says, listen, it's a great multitude, but I'm not going to tell you the number, right? I'm going to keep it numberless so that you don't overthink it. Just be part of it, kind of a thing. All right? Because God obviously knows how many. Jesus obviously knows how many. An angel can easily ask Jesus, and he could have said it. So when it says that it's a number which no one could number, it's a multitude that no one can number. That's really just trying to avoid giving us an exact number, so that we don't overthink it. All right. But again, when you read chapter 7, it makes it very clear, unless you go with complete literal, that it's a symbolic number. Go ahead, Sam.
Okay, so I know you literally just said that, but I like, what if the Great Tribulation is what people think it is, and that that great multitude is actually more about end times?
Then that's even better, to be honest.
Okay.
That would make it even better. You still see how it still conflicts with the first part, though, right? Because the first part's giving us a number. And if it's literal, then it should be it's going to be 144,000 when Jesus comes, right? This special group. So then you still have the problem with, well, now it's a great multitude, though. So which one is it? Is it 144,000, or is it a great multitude?
Well, no, the Great Tribulation, if that,
I understand. But you understand that the 144,000 is connected to, between the sixth and seventh seal. They're automatically connected to the end, right? So they would obviously have to go through the Great Tribulation as well, right? If they're sealed by God, then they must have to go through the Great Tribulation. So they're either just part of this great multitude, and for some reason they're singled out, which again would be very interesting, because that would mean that some of these great multitude people aren't sealed by God, right? Because only 144,000 are sealed by God. But if you're not sealed by God, how is it that you can still be saved? Do you see how it causes issues?
Mm,
Those two numbers. Now, let me go back to your thought though. Let's say the 144,000 is symbolic and it symbolizes the great multitude. Okay. But that the great tribulation is the end time.
yeah.
Then that's even better for us.
Yeah.
Because suddenly the great multitude isn't just Adam and Eve until now, which is already good, right? Because it still gives us a good chance. But God is saying that no, even at the end of the world, so right now there's what, 8 billion people on this earth. Um, but don't worry, because at the end of the world, there's going to be this massive amount of people that are going to be saved that you can't even number, right? Um, I'm happy with that. I'm okay to accept that. Um, for me, the only issue with that is it says that it's the great multitude that wears the white robes. And we know that when we get to heaven, everyone's going to have a white robe, right? So unless this great multitude has a special white robe that's maybe whiter than the other white robes, right? Like, why mention the white robes and the worshiping of God? It at least it looks like, I'll agree with you. I can't say it's 100%, but this second group, this great multitude, it definitely looks like everyone that's going to be saved, right? Because they have the white robes, they're before God. Well, all of us are going to do that, right? Everyone that's going to be saved is going to have a white robe, is going to be before God, and so on, right? So that's just where I have the issue. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But it's possible. I won't say that it's not. I won't say that it's wrong or whatever. In fact, I'm more than happy. That would actually make me really happy, because that gives us a really good chance, right? That a mass amount of people are going to be saved. It's a little different than what we usually read, right? When you go through the Bible, most people that are saved in a given generation is usually a minority, right? It's only a few that entered the ark, right? It's only a few of the original Israelites that entered into Canaan. It's always kind of a remnant, right? Which is really, the word remnant means that little bit at the end, kind of a thing, right? So usually it means a small number. Though, I mean, if we use something like Ellen White, she does say that there's going to be lots of people who are going to learn the truth and who are going to join in and be saved. So it does look like it is going to be still a large number, right? But that's using more Ellen White. The Bible itself doesn't get into that, into kind of giving numbers outside of this.
Cool.
All right. So again, just another, I think this is the last verse here. So that same group, right? It says, they shall neither hunger anymore nor thirst anymore, whose the sun shall not strike them, nor any heat. For the Lamb who is in the midst of the throne will shepherd them and lead them to living fountains of waters. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. So again, these verses are much more general, right? I don't believe, anyways, that when we get to heaven, Jesus is going to have a special group of people that he's like, no, you guys follow me, all the other humans, you just spread around, do whatever you want, but I'm going to leave these guys to the living waters, right? When I read this, I see this as, everyone that's going to be saved will be shepherded by Jesus to the living waters and so on, right? So again, I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying there's quite a lot of, at least, hints that this is talking about the larger, all of humanity that's going to be saved. Though I would be perfectly happy with the other way, right? Any questions? We did that one already. Any questions about this chapter? Now, we are going to come back to the 144,000. They appear like 2 or 3 times in Revelation. And we're going to get a little bit more information about them as we go on. But that's chapter 7. All right. And really, I know we focus on the whole number aspect of it, but to be honest, that's not the main point of the chapter. the main point of the chapter is realize there's an angel out there with a stamp, right? With the seal of God. And we gotta make sure we get that seal, right? We gotta make sure that we have the seal of God and not the mark of the beast. Because at the end of the world, you're gonna have one or the other. And the problem is those that refuse to make a decision, because God doesn't force anyone, he's not going to force his seal on anyone. The devil, however, is not so generous. So if you refuse to choose, you get the mark of the beast. He's going to force it on you, right? Which is why that's really the point of this chapter, is to say, listen, there's the seal of God. That's the one you want. That's the one. And realize that the time is short and that you got to get sealed before it's too late, right? Before it's forced on you, the mark of the beast. All right. So that's really the key of it. But we can't help it. We always get stuck on that whole 144,000 thing because it's kind of like a puzzle, right? It's like a mystery that we're always trying to figure out. So any questions before we wrap up? 9:13. All right, so let me stop recording here.